Hello, this is Loreena McKennitt, and you're listening to Mystery Tour Radio Show.
So, dear Loreena, what shall the fans expect from your performances on stage for the Visited Revisited tour with a more than amazing lineup, I will say?
Well, as it is implied by the title, we're going to perform the recording of the visit complete from top to bottom in the second set. The first set is going to consist of songs from other recordings, but the second set will be the complete recording of the visit in order. The musicians that I'm working with are long-standing friends of mine: Caroline Lavelle on cello, Brian Hughes on guitar and bouzouki, Hugh Marsh on violin, and Dudley Phillips on bass. So, yeah, we're really looking forward to returning to Italy.
Yeah, and next summer you will be in Italy again for 5 gigs,
Yes.
celebrating the 30th anniversary of The Mask and Mirror. It was like a record, all about universal questions about the meaning of, contamination between very distant cultures through this evocative musical fresco from the 15th century Spain. Can you tell us how the album was born and what does it represent for you?
Well, excellent question. For me, I've always been interested in what spirituality is
Yeah.
and its role in our lives as a human species. And you can't reflect on spirituality without taking on board the role of religions. And religions, I think, were a response to this need that we as a species have to be spiritually engaged. And so when I was researching the history of the Celts, and one of the first places that I researched was Spain, starting off in the northwest corner in Galicia. But you can't understand or appreciate Spanish history without appreciating the role of the Moroccan culture, and also a period of time where the Christian, Judaic, and Muslim communities cohabitated to a degree, to a good degree.
Yeah.
And so the Mask and Mirror was this exploration of different aspects of all of this. I also reflected on the path of the Sufis in that time. Many people are of the understanding they're predominantly associated with Islam. There was a writer by the name of Idris Shah. He argued that the Sufis would be found outside of Islam, but that there is but what they were talking about or was, for example, a concept of polishing the mirror of your soul. And when one is, and that this gets into that area of spirituality, that you're trying to reach towards the divine. This kind of exploration also manifested itself, let's say, in setting the poem of St. John of the Cross, The Dark Night of the Soul, and how he metaphorically refers to God as this kind of lover, a relationship. So it was very rich in terms of traveling throughout Spain and then traveling into Morocco.
There was a lot of mysticism, like in the Gnostic writings and so on.
Yes, yes. I mean, the religions have, sadly, in some ways, it sometimes become very political.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that politicalization has really, as we all know, has caused such serious problems. And but yes, it was really not being trapped or delving into the politics of it,
Yeah.
but the genuine, pure exploration of how do we reach into ourselves and our souls to a place of goodness and divine, and where but in a way that is interconnected with the rest of the world. And I think what's been very, very interesting in recent years for me, as I become much closer to the indigenous community communities here in Canada and starting to appreciate their worldview, which is it's another version of spirituality,
Yeah.
which is very integrated with the natural world and the respect that goes to the natural world.
While, how would you describe the sound and the atmosphere of the road back home? As you already told, home is not just the place where you live.
Yes, this feeling of home being much more than a building really came to me when I was working on an ancient muse back in about 2006 and 2007. And at that time, I was reflecting on more nomadic people who were moving their gurs or yurts around, and that it was this community of people. It was the rituals, the habits, the traditions that inform your culture. It could be washing. It could be having certain kind of meals together. It could be playing music together, and that this sense of home, or as the Greeks would say, it's a sense of agora, of being together, in their sense, was to discuss things of common interest or common concern. And I feel that this is so important in this day where we are living so much in our cylinder lives with our devices and so on. So the home for me has been much more than the physical structure, but those people and those habits and rituals that inform your daily, weekly, monthly, year on life, including things like playing music. So, for
Yeah.
example, for me, one of those very formative times was when I was living in Winnipeg, which is in the middle of the Canadian prairies, and attending a folk club on Sunday nights, where we were learning all this Celtic music. And we were sharing albums and playing different instruments. And in a way that at that time was part of my sense of home. And that once I became introduced to the history of the Celts and started following those Celts, that Celtic history through, all across Europe and into Turkey and Greece and Mongolia and China and Russia,
Yeah.
that whole journey was so rich. But this recording goes back to that little folk club in Winnipeg in the late 1970s. So when I think of the graphic of the cover, the mountains are kind
Yeah.
of like all that Celtic journey through all those places. And then I'm coming over the top of that hill, down this winding road, back to this intimate little cluster of houses and people where the ritual of and the fabric of those things it occurs.
Since your passion for Irish folk's roots is well known, we've lost two Irish music institutions, Shane MacGowan and Sinead O'Connor, recently. Can you give us your memories about them?
Well, I mean, I listened to the music to a small degree, but there were a couple of things that really quite struck me about is the depth of their passion and the originality in how they performed. That it was very deeply attached. It wasn't just a kind of fashionable thing. Their whole expression seemed very deeply attached to their
Yeah.
being, and taking some of the Celtic music or Celticness of the music into a very distinctive direction.
Harp is one of your instruments of choice, and recently there have been important musicians who have revived the nobility of this instrument, from Joanna Newsom to Mary Latimore. What does the harp represent for you, and who are, in your opinion, the best current interpreters of this instrument?
Well, first of all, I mean, my whole attraction to the harp began when I heard a recording back in the late 70s as a result of that folk music club of Alain Stivell, the harper from Brittany in France. And I heard his recording Celtic Harp Renaissance, and then another recording called Live in Dublin, where he used different musicians and instruments. And I mean, philosophically or academically, the harp is very much associated with the bardic tradition.
Yeah.
And the bards were the media of the time. They were charged in Celtic culture to capture the history, the storytelling, and as they moved around, they didn't have, as we know, radio and television and the internet. They played a significant role in connecting people and sharing important stories and history. So I feel in a way that I'm a very contemporary, I fall in a very contemporary part of that mission or that. With respect to be honest, and I'm ashamed to say this, I'm not that familiar with other um, uh, harpers. I should be, but I don't. I think this is as a result of me managing my career. I spend probably 70% of my time administrating, and I'm not listening to music or paying attention. So I don't really have any idea who else is playing harp.
Which sources would you suggest to younger generations interested into studying Celtic music and culture?
Well, I mean, the bands that I found so informative are not all together now. And again, like the Harpers, I'm not totally familiar with who some of the other groups are. I'm sure that there are many. But the ones that I was particularly influenced by were the Bothy Band and Planksty, Steel Eyed Span, the Watersons. Then they were more English. Um, Alain Stivell, I mentioned. Um, I don't know. Davy Spillane is a wonderful, or he was a wonderful
Yeah,
piper. The Chieftains, of course, were huge
yeah,
for me. But as I say, a number of these people and groups are no longer with us.
yeah.
But the recordings are.
Which are your main activities in the present days outside the musical area? For instance, the Falstaff Family Center.
Right. Well, there have been a handful of what I call civic enterprises. So the Falstaff Family Center is where I'm sitting now. I'm upstairs in my office here at that, and so I bought this building in 2000 and converted it into a family center. And we don't run much programming ourselves. We host and curate groups and agencies that are devoted and focused on children and families. We're also, and that could be, we have Multicultural Association downstairs, early childhood development. We are connected with the Indigenous community, and they have their medicine wheel gardens here. So anyway, so there's the Falstaff Family Center. I also in '98 set up a water safety fund called the Cook Reese Memorial Fund for Water Search and Safety, and raised between $3 and $4 million for that. And that was as a result of my fiance dying in a boating accident in '98. I also wear the hat still of being the honorary colonel for the Royal Canadian Air Force. So I'm a civilian in the Canadian military. And that role will end this coming year. But in that role, I'm there to be a bridge between the military and civilian life to help the families who are moving around. Um, and speaking about the importance of democracy and that we can't take it for granted. So that's another. And then I've been involved in some other civic battles here in Stratford, where there was one during COVID that had to do with the glass factory. We won that, thankfully. So I'm involved in quite a number of things outside of my musical career.
Yeah, and finally, what shall the fans expect from you once the tours will be over? Like anything studio related?
Well, I'm certainly thinking about it. A handful of years ago, I went to Rajasthan in India to explore the early Eastern connections to
Oh,
the Celts. That was a very rich research exercise. And I'd love to feel I could do something there to do with that material. Also, I'm thinking, as I mentioned, I've had more and more connections with the Indigenous people here in Canada, learning a lot of really rich and important things from them and through them. And there are different artists within that community that I would love to collaborate with, and share with other people around the world because, short of, let's say, Australia, New Zealand, maybe places in South America, North America, there are still Indigenous people. In Europe, not really so much so. And yet there's something really, really rich about their worldview that I think people would be very interested to learn more about. But it has far less to do with the Celts. That would be working on a project that is not connected to the history of the Celts, whereas the Rajasthan and India part would be.
Which final message, greeting, and invitation for your Italian fans to join you at your forthcoming gig would you send out?
Well, it's my sincere hope that anyone who enjoys my music is able to join us at our revisited tour in the springtime, or the Mask and Mirror tour in the summertime. It's always wonderful to perform for Italian audiences, and I love meeting folks when I can.